former Shadow Home Secretary, is a friend of Andrew Mitchell's. And from Warwickshire, we're joined by Bob Jones, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands. Bob Jones, let me come to you first. The Home Secretary said yesterday that if this is the way the police treat a cabinet minister, what hope does an ordinary member of the public have? She's right, isn't she?
Well, I don't think she is. I think possibly the problem's the other way round. We seem to be seeing a different level of treatment because it's an ex-cabinet member, and I think these police officers would not be treated the same way if it wasn't such a prominent person.
But these police officers totally misrepresented what happened at their meeting, and we'd never have known that unless Mr. Mitchell had taped the meeting. They were disingenuous, they were out to get him from the start. In what way is that proper behaviour of a police officer?
Well, there was a very thorough investigation supervised by the IPCC, which was then the results of which were then put to 3 senior officers in 3 different forces who all came to the conclusion on the facts and the legal advice that there was no case for levying any disciplinary action. That is a fair and open process, which at any time the IPCC could have taken over and run themselves. They decided not to. They washed their hands of it and then made a rather inflammatory statement at the end.
Well, the police investigated themselves, as they usually do. The IPCC looked at this investigation and said that in the end, the police had not shown honesty or integrity. What's wrong with that conclusion?
I don't see where they have the evidence for that particular position, and that was the findings of 3 senior officers supervised in a process that was run by the IPCC. So where does the evidence and the legal action come from?
Well, I'll give you an example. The police came out of that meeting with Mr. Mitchell and said that he wouldn't tell them what he'd actually said. He said that they wouldn't tell him the words he'd actually used with the police at the Downing Street gate. We now know from a transcript of a recording exactly what Mr. Mitchell had told them. They totally misrepresented what Mr. Mitchell had said.
Well, I've looked at the transcript. I've looked at particularly the words of my own police officer in the West Midlands and can't see where that misleading has actually taken place. And that was the findings of the very thorough investigation run by the IPCC. Unfortunately, now we have a position, those officers are in an extremely difficult position. They're not going to have a chance to have a further hearing. The outcome of the investigation is no action is going to be taken. That's the end of it. They're now in a position where they've been put on trial by the IPCC in the media and have basically been found guilty and haven't got the opportunity to clear their names.
Well, some will think they're lucky to have their jobs, Mr. Jones, after what they've done, since they're in positions of public trust and have clearly abused that trust. Let me ask you this, because I'm puzzled by your line. Weren't you elected to represent us, the people? Isn't that your job?
Absolutely.
Well, why have you been captured? Why have you been captured by the people you are meant to regulate? You're speaking now for the chief constables. You're representing them, not the people who elected you.
I think I'm very much representing the people who elected me, who want to see fairness and justice. West Midlands Police just officers suspended. We've sacked 3 police officers in the last month, mainly through the proactive work of our anti-corruption teams. We take an extremely hard line in integrity, but we then ensure that's fairness to all, including the police officers who are being investigated.
So these police officers, David Davis, haven't been treated with fairness?
It's rubbish. I mean, this is very unusual, because we actually have hard evidence of what was said in the meeting. We have a tape, and we have hard evidence of what was said outside the meeting. We also have the documents published by the Federation, the Police Federation's PR firm, saying what they intended to do, and they were setting out to bring down Andrew Mitchell. So I'm afraid, the gentleman, Mr. Jones, I think, describes the process as fair. It was not fair, it was not intelligent, it wasn't justice, and as a result, the Deputy Chairman of the IPCC, Deborah Glass, was entirely right to criticise them. I'm afraid we see this too often. When the police don't like the outcome, they mug the referee, and that's what's happening here.
What do you say to that, Mr. Jones? You're mugging the referee on behalf of the police.
Well, we certainly wish to point out yet again, the incompetence of the IPCC. I was only complaining about another incident today, and I was last week about the way the IPCC operated. But clearly, we're seeing an absolutely abusive process by the Deputy Chair of the IPCC. Having supervised it, let somebody else make the decision, If she'd have made that decision, she would have had the same facts, the same legal advice, and frankly would not have been able to make a different decision. She's wants her cake and eat it. She's letting somebody else carry the can for making the decision and then giving her own opinion, which is grossly unfair to the police officers under investigation.
The IPCC should have taken this on from the start, should they not?
Well, the IPCC's got very, very few staff, and it has some very serious investigation on the way. There are three types of investigation. Mr. Jones should look up the law, by the way. One's a supervised one, which is what we have here, where the IPCC keeps an eye on it, but the police carry it out for themselves. Implicitly, it trusts the police to do the job properly. Then there's a managed one, where they take much more direct, proactive involvement, and then there's the independent, which they do themselves. Now, what the IPCC did here was trust the police, as the public do generally, and unfortunately what this demonstrates is that the police cannot be trusted actually to investigate themselves. I'm afraid it's as plain as a pikestaff that what is happening here is the senior officers are trying to prevent their own forces from embarrassment. There's no more here than that. An attempt to stop embarrassment, I'm afraid, is a disgrace.
When you listen to Mr. Jones this morning, do you think your party's plan for elected police commissioners is working?
Well, I'm afraid your implicit comment that he's been captured by the people he's supposed to be keeping an eye on is true. I mean, he's not doing the job I would want. And I know from my own dealings with people in the West Midlands generally, the whole of the area, all three areas, they do worry about the extent to which they get a fair crack from the police.
Mr. Jones, let me come back to you again on one factual thing, because in a sense it's the crux of this. At this meeting, the police, with Mr. Mitchell, the police representatives there said, well, what did you say to the police at Downing Street? And Mr. Mitchell said, I did say some things I shouldn't have said. I said that I thought you were meant to protect us. I used a four-letter word, and he said some other things. But I did not use the word pleb. This is what I did say, but I didn't call them plebs, and I never would. Having come out of that meeting, and that's all on record, that's all in the recording of the meeting, they then come out of that meeting and they say to the press, he wouldn't tell us what he said. They lied to us. He had told us what they said.
Well,
Correct?
Well, that was looked at in absolute great detail, fully investigated, put to 3 senior police officers who I've got the greatest faith in the integrity of, and they came to the view there was insufficient evidence to levy any disciplinary charges. Now, that was the process.
I didn't ask
having looked at it myself, there is a series of ways of interpreting the comments that were actually made.
Really?
Having read the transcript, having seen the comments, I'm personally, in terms of the officer of the West Midlands, Chris Jones, I haven't seen anything that would suggest he misled in any comment that he has made subsequent to the interview.
So blind as those who will not see. This is almost a unique circumstance where we have the exact facts on videotape and tape. And there's a clear lie here, there's a clear attempt to mislead the public. It's also clearly premeditated from other documents.
And they didn't know the meeting had been recorded.
No, absolutely. If they'd known the meeting had been recorded,
they couldn't have said that.
They wouldn't have tried to say this. But what you see, what you've got here is a real problem, because what's the standard of probity we're applying here? These are people, all 3 officers here, are people who are trusted. They can arrest you. They can charge you.
They probably will after this.
They can go. Well, I drive very, very carefully these days. They go into court and give evidence against you. You require these people to be intrinsically honest. That's what you require. You do not want them to be willing to go out and mislead the public because it serves their political interest in an explicit campaign to bring down a directly elected cabinet minister. And that, of course, makes this a very high-profile issue. What terrifies me, actually, is what chance for a youngster, a young 16-year-old who faces this on the street on a Saturday evening, what chance has he got to get back? With the sort of representation we get from Mr. Jones, none at all.
All right, Bob Jones in Birmingham, thanks for joining us. We need to leave it there, Joe.
Yes, David Davis, though, stay with us. Emma Reynolds, who do you think's been treated unfairly here, the police officers or Andrew Mitchell?
Well, I think Andrew Mitchell has had to wait too long for the investigation. I think it's extremely worrying that the IPCC has then said the investigations didn't draw the proper conclusions. So I do think questions need to be asked about the police investigating the police. Yes. And in this situation, that doesn't seem to have been affected at all. Last October, Yvette Cooper called for Andrew Mitchell to be fined for the so-called Plebgate incident. Was she wrong to do so? Well, look, we thought, there were things that we thought at the time that we now think differently. You know, if having seen the transcript of what happened in Andrew Mitchell's office does change our understanding of the event. So I would say that, you know, we have a different position in terms of what we think happened. We haven't quite got to the bottom of everything that happened.
Fair, when the
that
facts
night.
change, you change your mind, and I take that view. I mean, I never thought he was guilty.
Right, but that's
I understand that people could have done.
But that's the question. Did you believe that he had used the word pleb in this instance? Well, there was an accusation that the opposition was too eager to believe it. It fitted a narrative. Do you think that was true then, and now it's been proved wrong, or could have been proved wrong?
We thought that he had sworn at a police officer, and it seems that is the case.
He's admitted as such.
Right.
But he didn't swear at the police officer. He swore in front of a police
He
officer.
swore in
I
front
thought
of
you
a
were
police
here to
officer.
protect us.
An interview with Andrew, you know, on the way out.
I thought you were here to protect us, and he swore as he was saying that.
Look, the truth of what happened here is the reason that Andrew Mitchell resigned was he said, my understanding of what happened at the time, and this is some time ago now, and I do think too much time has elapsed since then, but he said at the time that he felt he had lost the support of the Conservative Party, and that's why he resigned. It wasn't because anything that we said.
Do you think that they should apologise, those police officers?
I think they should seriously consider apologising. I think the transcript is pretty clear about what was said in the meeting.
Bob Jones is wrong.
I think that this does demonstrate, as I said again, and I know David Davis said this, that the police should not be investigating the police. There is too much of a conflict of interest there.
Right, but what do you think of Bob Jones defending... He said he's read the transcript, he has a different interpretation of that meeting, despite the fact that the officers, as we've discussed, said that actually Andrew Mitchell refused to say anything about what he said in that altercation. What do you think of Bob Jones's response?
Well, look, Bob Jones has his position on this issue. I think that there are some serious questions that these police officers now need to answer. And I think, above all of this, the IPCC has to be the superior body. That's what they're there for. They're the Independent Police Complaints Commission. But what I worry about with all of this is that not only have there been some very serious allegations of malpractice, but this is a big row now, and what does it leave the public thinking?
Right,
you know,
well, let's do the trust. This is a Labour police commissioner. I mean,
yeah, and I know him very well. He used to be a Wolverhampton City Councillor. I know Bob Jones extremely well. I think he's doing a great job, by the way, across the West Midlands on all sorts of issues. He's been talking about rooting out corruption and the things that he's doing in local communities. I am not comfortable with the position that the three police forces are taking, and I'm not comfortable with the police investigating the police. Steve,
where would you like to see Andrew Mitchell back in government?
I think he's a very capable minister. I don't appoint ministers, but he's obviously lost his career, certainly until now because of this. He's apologised for the swearing, he's apologised for what happened, and rightly so. But now, you know, it's £250,000 we've spent already. We're still going on about this. It really does need a line drawing under it.
They've interviewed hundreds of officers who clearly knew nothing about it to sort of prove they were doing a good job, which they weren't, of course. There we are.
What do you think should happen to the officers involved?
Well, I mean, if it is the case that they have misled people, then that's a fundamental element of being a police officer. You know, you've got to be able to be confident, and the vast bulk of police officers are reliable, competent, you know, honest people, and as in our profession, sometimes a small number of people drag the whole thing down, and that's what seems to be happening in this case.
All right, thank you. Thank you, David Davis.
My pleasure.
Now, the average house